Hi you guys, so we have a new learning target today. So our learning target today is I can represent a fraction with equal parts that are smaller in size than the equal parts of an equivalent fraction. Now I know that sounds a little bit confusing, but when we talk about equivalent fractions, they mean fractions that are equal. So when we're comparing two fractions, that means that the parts that are shaded in are equal in size. Even though one fraction might be split into more equal parts, it can still be equivalent with another fraction that's split into less equal parts. So let's look at this first question. It tells us that Kyra folds a sheet of paper in half and shades one of the two sections. Julio folds Kyra's sheet in half again. Kyra says half of the sheet is shaded. Julio says 2/4 is shaded. Who is correct? Now let's go through and just underline our important information. So Kyra folds a sheet of paper in half and shades one of the two sections. That's what Kyra does. Julio folds Kyra's sheet in half again. Kyra says half of the sheet is shaded. Julio says 2/4 is shaded. Who is correct? Well, first, I'm going to draw two sheets of paper because I have two different ways that they were folded. So first, let's fold Kyra's. So there's Kyra's sheet of paper, and she folded hers in half. And then she shaded one of the two sections. So there's Kyra's piece of paper. Now, Julio takes this same sheet of paper So I'm going to take this same sheet of paper So he took the same sheet of paper, and then he decided to fold it in half again. So Kyra folded it in half this way. Julio is going to fold it in half this way. Now, Kyra says that half of this sheet is shaded, but Julio says 2/4 is shaded. Who is correct? Well, let's look at Kyra's piece of paper. It is split into two equal parts, which means 2 is my denominator, and one of those parts is shaded. So it shows me Kyra's right, but now I'm going to double check, and I want to see if Julio's right too, because we never know. Maybe it could be a trick question and both of them are correct. So now Julio has it split into 1, 2, 3, 4 equal parts because he folded it in half, and he has 1, 2 equal parts shaded. So who is correct? Both of them. Same sheet of paper, but Kyra only had it split into 2 equal parts. Julio just wanted to fold it in half again and make 4 equal parts, but the same amount is still shaded on both of them. So we would say that 1/2 is equal to 2/4. They're equivalent fractions. Now let's look down at question 2. Tia folds a square paper into fourths. So she folds it into fourths, and then she shades 3/4 of the paper red. So looking down here, it says here's the paper that she folds into fourths, but then they have us fold it into eighths. So let's work with our fourths first. 4 equal parts, 3/4 are shaded red. Now, it also tells us that Tia folds the sheet of paper again to make eighths. So, she started with fourths. Again, she had the 3/4 shaded, but then she decided to fold her paper again to make it into eighths. So now I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. That sheet of paper is now split into eighths. So here's our fourths, here's our eighths. What fraction of the paper is now shaded red? So first, she had 3/4. Then she decided to split it or fold it again into eighths. So I know my denominator is going to be 8, but I need to know how many parts were shaded red. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6 eighths. And you can tell by looking at these two folded pieces of paper that they're equivalent. The same amount of space is shaded on both of them, which means that 3/4 right here is equal to or equivalent to 6 eighths. Now, let's move on to our next set of questions. Now we have some fraction strips. So now we're getting away from the folding and all that of the paper, and we're going to use fraction strips. But first, I just want to go over the definition of an equivalent fraction. Equivalent fractions are two or more fractions that name the same amount or distance on a number line. Now, not just a number line. It can be the fraction strips or the squares or a circle, whatever you use. You just have to remember that the equivalent of fraction is two or more fractions that have the same amount or distance. That's what equivalent means. It means equal or the same. So let's look at number 3 with using our fraction strips. Alvin folds a strip of paper into thirds and shades 2/3. So Alvin shades, he splits it into thirds and shades 2/3. Then he folds the same strip again into sixths. Show both strips of paper. So first let's shade my 2/3. Here's where I'm working with my thirds. So 2/3. Now I'm working with sixths. I need to make these two fractions equivalent or equal. They need to take up the same amount of space or distance. So I'm going to look up here and come down to my 6, and I'm going to shade until I'm evenly lined up with my 2/3. So I have 1, 2, 3, 4. So I have 4 equal parts of my 6th shaded. So I can see that 2/3 is equivalent or equal to 4/6. My 4 equal parts shaded lines up perfectly with my 2 equal parts shaded. Now, we're taking this same equivalent fraction and we're putting it onto a number line. So divide the number line to show thirds and sixths. First down here, it's already started. I start with 0 and 3/3. So I know 0, thirds, 1/3, 2/3, and then 3/3. Now, the neat thing is we already figured out which sixths is equivalent to my 2/3. I know that 4/6 is going to line up perfectly with my 2/3. So here's those equivalent fractions. But now I also need to show the rest of my number line. I still need to break it into 6. So I know this is going to be 0 6. Up here is going to be 6 6. So I know in the middle of 4 6 and 6 6 I have 5 6. So I can see now that between my thirds I just split it in half one more time. So 0 6, 1 6, 2 6, 3 6, and then 4 6. So looking at this number line, I can see a few other equivalent fractions. I can see that 0 6 is the same as 0 thirds. They're equivalent. 2 6 and 1 third are equivalent. And then 6 6 and 3 thirds are equivalent. Now, we're getting away from our fraction strips and our number line. We're going to go back down to just shading in. So, shade to show 1/4. Already split into fourths. I'm showing 1/4. I have 1 out of my 4 shaded. Then, draw a line to show an equivalent fraction. So, I'm already split into fourths. And it only tells me to draw 1 line. And remember, they have to be equal parts. So I can't go right here because then they're not split evenly. I'm going to go right directly in the middle and split it just like that. Now I need to find how many equal parts I have. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I have 8 equal parts, and 1, 2 of them are shaded. So 1/4 is equal to or equivalent to 2 8. For number 5, we're going to be using a number line again. So my number line is drawn. It's all labeled. It's labeled with halves and 6 and 6. Find my half right here. Just going to draw a circle so you guys can see it. There's my half. And then what fraction is perfectly lined up above it? 3 6. So that means that 1/2 equals or is equivalent to 3 6. The important thing to remember when you are working with equivalent fractions, in order for them to be equivalent, they need to take up the same amount or distance. These fractions, 2 thirds and 4 6, they take up the same amount. Down here, 2 thirds and 4 6, they take up the same distance. So the same distance away from 0. So make sure when you are doing your assignment that you're drawing a picture, either using your fraction strips or a number line, or just shading, whatever works for you. But make sure you're lining them up to check if they're equivalent. So, good luck on your assignment, and I hope this helps.